Welcome to Wisdom Time. Today we're diving into something that's, super practical, a guide to making personal fiqh decisions. Fiqh is basically our human understanding of divine law, figuring out the rules for everyday life from the core sources of Islam. And let's be real, we've all been there, right? You're facing a tricky situation, a moral crossroad, and you're just wishing for a clear, simple answer on what to do. Well, in this explainer, we're going to tackle a question that really gets to the heart of how to live a principled life in this crazy modern world. And this question right here is what we're all about today. It's a deeply practical and personal challenge for so many of us. I mean, you have to make a choice right now. But it's not like you have a qualified scholar on speed dial. So what do you do? How do you handle those moments with real integrity and, wisdom? So here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk about the everyday moral questions we all face. Then, we'll get into why the bar for making formal rulings is so incredibly high. After that, we'll get to the good stuff, a really practical guide for your own actions. We'll also touch on those tough, conflicting choices before wrapping up with a clear path forward. All right, let's jump in with the challenge itself. Look, this isn't some abstract debate for the classroom. This is about the real-time decisions we have to make at work, at home, with our friends, in our communities. It's a struggle anyone trying to do the right thing can relate to. And this is the first really crucial point to get. The goal here is not to turn you into a scholar overnight who can issue judgments for everybody else. Nope. It's about giving you a framework, a way of thinking, so you can guide your own next step, your personal actions, in a way that's responsible and thoughtful. This brings us to a really fundamental idea. Before we can figure out what we should do, we got to be crystal clear on what we probably shouldn't do. And that all starts with understanding the huge difference between making a personal choice and issuing a formal religious ruling. So what is a formal ruling or a fatwa, anyway? Well, it's not just someone's opinion. It's a serious legal declaration that carries a lot of weight and consequence. And it comes from an incredibly deep, deep well of knowledge. It's a specific job for people who've basically dedicated their entire lives to mastering the religious sciences. And this mastery we're talking about, it's not just one thing. It's a whole package deal. A scholar needs to know the scriptural verses inside and out, plus the whole backstory of why they were revealed. They need to know the prophetic traditions and how authentic they are. They need to know what scholars have said for centuries. And on top of all that, they need to actually understand the technical side of the subject, whether it's modern finance or biology. The bar is incredibly high, and honestly, for very good reason. This all leads to a piece of advice that is, well, it's pretty powerful, and it really makes you stop and think. It says, do not make a decision at all if you take God and his religion seriously. Just let that sink in for a second. This isn't talking about your personal actions. This is a direct warning against the arrogance of trying to issue a formal ruling for other people without having those immense qualifications we just talked about. So here's the big mindset shift we need to make. We are not trying to be the judge, the jury, or the lawmaker here. Our goal is so much more personal and immediate. It's simply to choose the most responsible, God-conscious action for ourselves in that moment. It's a huge shift from judgment to personal conduct. And you know what? That shift brings us to the most practical, hands-on part of our explainer. If we're not issuing rulings, what principles can actually guide our actions? Think of this section as our moral compass for those everyday moments of uncertainty. Okay, so what's principle number one? It's the most foundational one of all, the preservation of life. This means your health, your ability to make a living, your basic well-being. The guidance is that protecting these things is the absolute highest priority, so much so that for their sake, some obligations might be postponed, optional acts can be left, and even minor sins might be tolerated if it's a matter of survival. And this principle isn't just something made up. It's rooted right in the scripture. This verse here, from Surah An-Nahl, talks directly about situations where you're forced, under extreme pressure. It shows that making concessions is allowed to preserve your life and faith, as long as that belief in your heart stays strong. All right, let's talk about navigating those gray areas, those doubtful matters. First, if a questionable action actually solves a real practical problem, like, say, taking a specific job that has some gray areas but you need it to feed your family, the guidance leans towards seeing it as permissible because of that necessity. But, and this is the balance, if there's no pressing need, it's always better to just stay clear of doubtful things. And this third point is so important. If an optional good deed, like a charity fundraiser, gets mixed up with something that's clearly sinful, the priority is to avoid the sin. You just abandon the whole thing. And the practical advice just keeps coming. A core idea here is that your faith should be a source of ease, not a path to your own destruction. You shouldn't interpret it in a way that causes you serious harm. And when you have two choices, the guidance is simple. Always go for the safer, risk-free option. Finally, in situations with intense social pressure or even danger, the guidance recognizes that you need to protect yourself. It can be okay to postpone some outward acts of piety to keep yourself safe from harm. Okay, this next section tackles a problem I'm sure we've all faced. What happens when all your choices kind of stink? When every option seems to have a good part and a bad part. How in the world do you prioritize? This chart lays it out so clearly, it's basically a priority list. Look, if you have an obligatory act, something you have to do, and it happens to come with a minor sin, the priority is the obligation. You do the act. But if you have an optional good deed that's mixed with a sin, the whole equation flips. In that case, you abandon the act completely to avoid the sin. See? It's all about putting the obligatory over the optional. We've just gone through some seriously practical principles for making tough choices. If you're finding this guided approach helpful for breaking down these complex topics, hey, just take a quick second. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like our video, and definitely turn on that notification bell so you don't miss our future explainers. All right, let's bring it all home in our final section. We've gone from the problem to the principles, and now we can map out what a responsible path forward really looks like. And it's one that's built on a foundation of humility and real practical wisdom. If there's just one thing you take away from our time together, let it be this. We've come full circle. The pressure is off. You don't have to be a supreme judge. You just need to focus on taking the wisest, most compassionate, and most responsible action for yourself in any given moment. So, as a final recap, here are the absolute key takeaways. First, always know the huge difference between your personal choice and a formal ruling. Second, act with humility. It's okay to acknowledge the limits of what you know. Third, remember the highest priorities, preserving life, health, and avoiding harm. And finally, use these practical principles as your compass whenever you feel lost. And we'll end with this question, just for you to think on. You see, the principles we've talked about, they aren't just a checklist. They're a whole mindset. They invite us to hold our convictions firmly, but to apply them with wisdom, with pragmatism, and with a deep sense of humility about our own place in the world. So, how do we walk that line every single day? Well, that's the continuing journey. Thanks for joining me.